Everything our rogue government is doing is part of a larger global corporate standardization away from checks and balances and liberty and towards a global autocratic neo-feudalistic state. And almost all historians, political scientists, constitutional lawyers agree. They just had the head of a large international bank, we covered this a few days ago, go public and said we're collapsing into authoritarianism in the West. And the rest of the world's already been under it forever. It's only the Renaissance and things in the last 500 years that has given any semblance to the idea of freedom. It's not that our Declaration of Independence, Constitution, Bill of Rights gives us rights. It states eloquently the rights of organic freedom that is already there for all humans. And so it never delivered the utopia, but it came further than any other system and is the best model out there in my humble view. Senator Ted Cruz has come out and called the president dangerous and terrifying. And the media is like, oh, my gosh, that's so mean, that type of rhetoric. Well, it is what it is. There is total autocratic, authoritarian rule by executive order, the likes of which we've never seen. And if there isn't a pushback and a reversal, it will set the precedent on guns, on borders, on the IRS persecuting political enemies. The FBI has come out and said that their primary mission, here's the article from last week, the FBI is a national security agency, drops law enforcement as top priority from its mission. And that is a political commissar position targeting the Tea Party, gun owners, libertarians, saying it's not al-Qaeda now in their national security mission, it's gun owners. This is a criminal foreign corporate takeover that's anti-free market. It's crony capitalism using socialism to domesticate the population. And if that idea is not understood and adopted by the opposition to the tyranny, and if we don't get that message out, we'll never win. The mainline right wing says all corporations are great, get rid of the borders, blah, 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 corporate welfare is wonderful. The left says government's wonderful, Stalin, we love you, parents are bad. And then we see that as the opposition. When the truth is the Republicans, like the governor of New Jersey, are placeholders to make it look like there's opposition to this authoritarian takeover. And then they take the moral high ground that they are the authorities, that they are the progressives, they are the ones that care, they are the civil rights activists when they teach your 5-year-old how to have sex. No, these are power-grabbing, megalomaniacal control freaks who are not successful in culture with their ideas, their writings, their music, their art, their courage, their trailblazing, their innovation. They innovate in gang fraud. They innovate in kleptocratic king rat societies of groups. They are the plague. They are the cancer. They are the anathema threat to all that is good. I mean, there's no way to describe it. And what Ted Cruz has said is, you are evil, you are dangerous, you are tyrant. People are like, man, that's really radical. Yeah, it's radical and it's true. Him saying it isn't what did it. It's already there. It's already going on. It's already happening. You just have to admit it and then decide if you want to live in a progressively worse, progressively more authoritarian, progressively oppressive system. You're like, well, I haven't done anything wrong. That's not how tyrannies work. They come after you. Has a gazelle done anything wrong when a lion grabs it and eats it? Did those kids that Jeffrey Dahmer grabbed and tortured, did they do anything wrong? Did the people killed not by the Nazi Germans, did they do anything wrong? No, most of them didn't do anything. Did the tens of millions killed by the Russians under communism, did they do anything wrong? No. It's like in Goldfinger, he says, you expect me to talk? James Bond does, and he goes, no, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. You're being culturally overwritten. The family's being broken up. Joining us for the balance of the hour until the last 15 minutes or so, I may even do some overdrive with Jakari Jackson and others out there on the radiation in California increasing. They got some good news. In most areas, it's only increased slightly from Fukushima. But Elizabeth Price Foley joins us. She is a founding member of FIU College of Law. She teaches constitutional law, civil procedure, and healthcare law. She is admitted to practice in Florida, Texas, and before the U.S. Supreme Court. The professor is an author of Liberty for All, excellent book, Reclaiming Individual Privacy in the Era of Public Morality, The Law and Life and Death, the Tea Party, 3 Principles. And we appreciate her joining us. ElizabethPriceFoley.com is her website, and she's going to break down Obama's power grab and how would she, a law professor, constitutional lawyer, how would she define it? And then what are the remedies when we are faced with a true tyrannus? Thank you so much for coming on, Professor.
Oh, thanks, Alex. I appreciate you having me today.
Well, what are we facing as a culture, as a society? What do we do? Go over the laundry list and then how we counter this.
Yeah, I mean, this president seems sort of hell-bent on violating the Constitution. I will say this, we all learn sort of in grade school, right, the basic idea of separation of powers, that we have a legislative branch that makes the laws, and then we learn that the president has a duty under the Constitution in Article 2 to faithfully execute those laws. And I think he missed that week in school because, he's been doing a lot of things that other presidents simply have not had the boldness to do or the audacity to do. So let's take some of the big ones. His big signature legislative achievement, Obamacare, right? There's at least 5 major things that the president has done to effect essentially a unilateral amendment of those laws. He's not faithfully executing Obamacare as written. He's changing it with sort of the swipe of a magisterial pen. So, one thing he did, he delayed these out-of-pocket caps that are written into the law. He says, well, I'm going to put that off for a year because that's too hard for the employers and the insurers to figure out. Then he takes the employer mandate, a big, giant component of Obamacare that requires employers, provide insurance or face these giant tax penalties. With a stroke of a pen, he delays that for a year. Then he's got this recent thing about a month ago where he decides, he told everybody, if you like your insurance, you can keep it. Well, it turns out that that's not true, and about 6 million Americans are losing their coverage. So when the political heat got turned up on that one, he said, well, you know what I'll do? I'll just say that a lot of people whose health insurance gets canceled don't have to buy health insurance. They don't have to abide by the individual mandate. I'm going to give them a hardship exception. So he changed that. And then he's got this thing that the law is crystal clear, for example, that the only employers who have to pay the tax penalty and the only people who are entitled to the tax credit are people who buy their health insurance through state exchanges. And that was purposeful by Congress. They did that because they wanted to, incentivize states to run their own exchanges rather than relying on some monolithic, horrible healthcare.gov, which we ended up with. And he said, well, I'm going to change that unilaterally, too, by regulation. I'm going to say all of the requirements of law are going to apply whether you buy your health insurance through the state exchanges or our horrible federal exchange.
And so what is that when he shuts down the power plants without congressional approval and he sends in military without congressional approval and puts them under NATO command and on and on and on? I mean, is that not the office becoming dictatorial? And isn't Ted Cruz right calling it dangerous and terrifying?
Yeah, I think Ted Cruz is 100% right. I mean, if it's not dictatorial, it's darn close to it. It's the closest I think we've ever seen in this country, maybe since.
Well, sure, and it stops the political will to take the wind out of our sails to repeal the whole stinking thing by him selectively backing off so that we don't get upset and get the will. I mean, this is a very crafty, whispering in the ear way of strangling this country.
Yeah, I mean, it's his way of saying, especially to the Democrats who are going to be facing tough elections in a couple of years, I'm going to throw you a bone. I'm going to unilaterally change this law. I know I'm not enforcing it as written like I'm constitutionally supposed to do, but I want to try to help you in your elections by sort of alleviating the harshness of the law. President doesn't have the power constitutionally to do this. I mean, frankly, this is an impeachable offense, but nobody has, the courage to say that.
Well, Julius Caesar acted like a dictator for a while before he officially came one. And again, I believe the establishment wants dictatorial centralized power. They want that all over the world. It's easier to buy off one group than, a whole Congress and the states and the rest of it. But so I'm not saying Obama is going to be a dictator. I'm saying he is setting the precedent for future presidents to really actually become a physical dictator and a dictatorship of the bureaucracy. Do you agree with that statement, Professor?
Absolutely. I mean, mean, I think that the problem here, for example, is the Democrats like what the president is doing. It is in accord with their policy preferences and their own political hides. And so not only do they like what he's doing, and they aren't complaining about it, so we'll never get any, the Senate, for example, to ever impeach him or even seriously consider it, but they're actually encouraging the president to do more of it. I mean, there was a recent group of Democratic members of Congress who wrote a letter to the president asking him, in fact, to suspend the entirety of immigration law and not deport anyone.
Well, Professor, that's a new drumbeat. As you said, he set it up where I can't just act outside the Constitution. Then it's like, well, I may have to. And now he's like, I'm going to do whatever I need to. And they've got pundits on MSNBC and CNN every week now saying he needs to just do whatever he wants.
Yeah, they're applauding it, and what they don't realize, that's so short-sighted because, frankly, I don't want Republican presidents to disregard the Constitution either, so I don't want to set a precedent where a future Republican president behaves in the same unconstitutional way. This is a very dangerous precedent to be setting.
We're going to go to break and come back, and I want to talk about solutions, but other key points you want to make. I mean, I've got a lot of questions to ask you, but what are some of the other areas you're going to cover when we come back, Professor?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about what he's been doing, gutting the Welfare Reform Act, the No Child Left Behind Act, our Controlled Substances Law. There's a whole slew of things we could talk about.
So he's literally legislating from the executive by recomboing these huge laws any way he wants. I mean, it's like having a set of Legos, and the law is the map of how they're supposed to be put together. He throws the directions away and just builds whatever he wants. That is a very sophisticated dictator 2.0 is what it is. We'll be right back with our guest on the other side, Elizabeth Price Foley. She is a law professor, constitutional lawyer. Straight ahead as we examine our dictatorial, autocratic, imperial state.
Now you can watch the InfoWars Nightly News streaming live as it happens for free.
Check it out at Infowars.com/show.
We're going to get into solutions with her in the next segment, but continuing with the so-called abuse of power, it's much worse than that. Everything they've been doing is systematic to set the precedent that he can serve as a UN Security Council head that violates Article 1, Section 9, that he can launch military operations and fund al-Qaeda and say that he got the authority from NATO, not even from himself. That's even worse. And on the treason scale, saying a foreign group gave him authority. So we've really entered into some crazy times. MSNBC pundit calls on Obama to govern by decree. A few months ago, or a few weeks ago, there was testimony in Congress by constitutional lawyers on the left and the right. And we played the clip, said there isn't much further to sink here and that we were in danger of the form of government failing. And then they talked about only an armed revolution to counter it. I want to talk about some of the other abuses, but how do you counter something like this, Professor?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, the first and most obvious one would be impeachment, but with a Democrat-controlled Senate and Democrats seeming to like what the president is doing and blessing it, that seems the near impossibility because it would take 2/3 of the Senate to convict. So that's not going to happen. If you take that check and balance off the table, really the only other thing we can do is litigate potentially in court, but there are major impediments to lawsuits going forward against the president to challenge some of these abuses.
So what does that leave us? You've got Homeland Security gearing up to crush political opposition. This looks like a premeditated authoritarian takeover.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, one of the big problems, people ask me all the time, well, why can't we just sue the president for violating the Constitution? It sounds so simple, but unfortunately the law, as the Supreme Court's developed it over the years, has become very complex on this. And one of the big sort of geeky technical things that is demanded now to bring a lawsuit is this thing called standing. And it sounds very obscure, but standing is pretty simple. It says that if you're the plaintiff, that you're initiating the lawsuit, you have to prove to the court that you've got a very particularized, very individual injury that you're suffering. So think about what some of these things that President Obama is doing. He's delaying various portions of Obamacare. He is deciding not to deport certain young people. He's giving waivers to the states so they don't have to comply with the No Child Left Behind law. All of these types of actions by the president, remember, he styles himself a constitutional law professor himself, so he knows this, are what we would call benevolent acts by the president. And
but they create the acts and then come and shield you selectively from their own operation. Isn't that the essence of discrimination and authoritarianism, when they bring in oppressive laws and then the dictator selectively enforces it, so you're now under a basic new royalty where if you have a letter of marque, you're allowed to operate, but if you're not given the grace of the licensure, now you're a slave.
That's precisely it, you see. So by taking all of these benevolent acts and sort of waiving, the law and exempting and granting privileges to certain people that they don't have to abide by the law, or at least they don't have to abide by it for another year or two or however many years he decides, then he is not injuring anyone in the way that someone would have standing to sue him. So you cannot get the courts to open up their doors to hear these lawsuits because he's basically acting like the King of England used to act and granting privileges or exemptions from law. So it's a very difficult technical legal problem that is really going to, if the court doesn't find a way to open up their standing rules to allow some of these lawsuits to go forward, then the president could really take advantage of it, not just President Obama,
Sure,
but future presidents as well. And that's really going to threaten the separation of powers.
Well, Professor, even with a corrupt establishment, do they really want to get rid of all the checks and balances in their power grab? Because historically, that will destroy the very elite that is eroding checks and balances. They're creating a centralized system that's going to cause huge dictatorial governmental turnover, and then the whole mission of the country or the empire will then be about the king's court and capturing that instead of actually having commerce.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is kind of what crony capitalism is all about, if you think about it. I mean, if you get to the point where the president isn't just a guy who faithfully executes the law the way he's supposed to, but in fact he has sort of near dictatorial power to waive the law when he thinks it's okay, or when you have political connections to him and you can get such a privilege or a waiver, then that works in favor of the people who have power. And I think that they see, at least right at the moment, with their perhaps nearsightedness, that this could be an advantageous system to them.
You're right. Let's talk about more of the abuses and solutions with the amazing Professor Elizabeth Price Foley that joins us. But ladies and gentlemen, the system we're going into is 180 degrees the polar opposite of what this country was founded on. So let's just get that straight. This is totally un-American. Symbols are powerful, and the globalists have hijacked the symbols of America. They've turned them into their own symbols. Well, we are restoring the idea of the true republic, not the counterfeit globalist empire, by promoting the icon George Washington and others. That's why we're rolling out on 100% made in America line of incredible pro-liberty apparel. We are repopularizing liberty. We are helping fellow Americans rediscover what made this country great. We are the spirit of 1776. We are 1776 worldwide. We are all brothers and sisters in arms in the animating contest of liberty in the long march towards humanity's ultimate destiny of freedom. Visit madein1776.com today and vote with your dollars to promote truly made in America, high-quality products, and promote the ideals of liberty.